You don't need to know that much about Varroa mites to get through July. You know, only if you want to get through the winter.
Buzz.
Varroa are the biggest threat to honeybees that's out there, and it was my education about the impact of Varroa mites to my colonies that I think was the core of my overwintering success. All of the insulation strategies, winter prep, none of that matters if your colony has a virus load high enough that they're not going to survive beyond February. You know, all of this stuff is just assuming you're going into fall with healthy bees. This will make sure they're still healthy, or the best chance we've got in April when they start building up again. So let's talk about Varroa mites. Okay, look at those crazy looking things. Varroa is the #1 reason colonies do not survive. It's not the cold, it's not the length of winter. It's Varroa mites. And I want you to imagine that the size of that mite on you. It would be a dinner plate. That's how big this ectoparasite is. Ecto just means on the outside, not on the inside. So they're really fascinating creatures. I mean, look, it looks like a little crab there, hairy, and they're blind, and somehow they manage to do all their damage. You know, I talk about how honeybees do all this amazing things in the dark. Yeah, they're the same way. They're doing all this stuff in the dark, all this finding new bees, jumping on new bees when it's time. So the name is apt. Varroa destructor was originally a pest of the Asian honeybee, which is a cousin of our honeybee. Apis cerana is the Asian honeybee. Ours is Apis mellifera. They managed it quite nicely. They co-evolved together. So they had strategies for managing mites. It preyed exclusively on drones in Asian colonies, exclusively. And so when the infestation rate got high, they stopped raising drones. And guess what happened to the mite population? You know, yeah, see how that's pretty cool, huh? They got introduced to the United States in 1987. Now, that is really the short story. The long story is the European honeybee it's such a successful species and profitable that it was spread around the world. And so what happened wasn't so much that the Varroa came to the European honeybee, it's that the European honeybee went to Varroa. It ended up with colonies all throughout Asia where Varroa mites were there, and somehow, and there's lots of theories on this, but somehow this host, or one or some of this host, managed to figure out that they could parasite. They jumped essentially their target species to European honeybees, to our bees. So it's everywhere. Australia was really proud that they didn't have it for a long time. Guess what they've got now? Varroa mites. They freaked out. They quarantined. They did all this stuff, and now they've given up on it. It cannot be contained. So they parasitize both the larvae and adult bees, and they feed on fat bodies. But that's only part of the problem. They vector diseases. That's the big problem. So by vector, it's just a fancy word, makes you sound like you're smarter than you are. They transmit diseases. So honeybee immune system was designed to combat viruses that were introduced through their gut system. Their gut is essentially their immune system. But that's not how Varroa operates. They pry themselves between the plates on the abdomen of these bees, and they feed. And when they inject their proboscis in there, they're also injecting viruses directly into the bee. So they're bypassing their gut immune system. Honeybees did not evolve to manage viruses in that way. And I think I don't think it's an exaggeration to say it's an epidemic. And so what now we're having is evolution in real time, adaptation in real time, in a situation in which the host has no natural way to fight this pest. And now they will all have traits. I'll get into that more. The future is optimistic, but the present is challenging. So I found this slide. I totally stole it. I love it. The 10 reasons for colony loss in the U.S. Varroa mites, which I said. 2, deadly viruses spread by Varroa mites. Colony dies over the winter because the winter bees were weakened by Varroa mites and the virus is spread by Varroa mites. You get the picture. They abscond, which is, from time to time, colonies will just up and leave. And no one knows exactly why. One of my beekeeper friends in the lower 48 says that people think too much about this. There was something in the colony that they couldn't overcome, so they left. That's the way to think about it. What was it? It's just conjecture. We don't know. But it almost always involves Varroa mite infestation. So they can't build up their population. They starve. Here's three. Here's 3 that aren't necessarily related to Varroa mites. Starvation, queen failure, and brood diseases. Now, starvation is something that I do see in Alaska for people who do poor winter prep or late winter prep and the bees starve. I have also seen it happen in the summer. If we get in one of these 2 solid weeks of rain and they haven't got a lot of food stored and they have a lot of brood, our colonies really struggle. So one of the things I'll tell you, I already did, and I'll say it again and again, you got to see what the colony's telling you. You have to check. So queen failure is obvious. If the queen dies, a colony can fail. They'll try to make a new queen. They won't always do it. The colony can fail. And there are brood diseases that are not related to Varroa. American foul brood, European foul brood. Yes. So you're actually asking a more complex question than you think. I'm not aware of any outbreak of American foul brood in Alaska, but other people are, and I am aware that they have found American foul brood spores in colonies in Alaska that did not seem to, I'm not sure it was that or the colony didn't succumb, whatever. I don't know enough about American foul brood for that exact reason. It's not in Alaska. It's not something I've had to learn. I can tell you that by and large, it's managed in the lower 48 and by our California bee suppliers. But it is the bad one. It is the one where they'll recommend you burn all of your equipment because the spores last however long, thousands of years. So, pardon?
What's it called?
American foul brood. And they call it foul brood because it stinks, and it's devastating. European foul brood also smells bad, but usually colonies can recover from it with good nutrition and good weather. So, and then chalk brood is the name I was trying to. Chalk brood is a disease that kind of gives you these mummified larvae. That's also something that good nutrition and good weather and they'll usually recover from. A lot of times a new queen will help with that too. Pesticides, which is not a big problem in Alaska. But I have heard many reports of colony problems that happen right after mosquito spraying. And I'll give you my little spiel now that pesticides are designed to kill bugs, and bees are bugs. And there is no safe level of pesticides. when they're putting the label requirements on there about use, they can claim they're bee friendly if the loss is minor. And the way they control that is they have restrictions on whether you can apply it when it's windy or not, or in proximity, right? Or directly onto flowers that are being foraged upon, stuff like that. Well, I can tell you, I've seen many reports, these poor guys doing this job, you know, they have these subscriptions, they have to go out and treat them once or every whatever, 7 or 10 or 14 days. And if that day is windy, some of them don't wait. Some of them go out and do it anyway. And yeah, I have seen, and Fairbanks had a rash of this, a lot of colony deaths, or at least big die-offs, directly related to mosquito spraying. So, and beekeeper neglect. Beekeeper neglect kills bees. Primarily it kills bees through starvation. They didn't feed them when they could have. Maybe they didn't notice the queen failing. And late winter prep. I see that as the most common one, and I get it. Try to be kind. Life happens sometimes. You know, just about to start your winter prep, one of your relatives out of state has some sort of health event. You have to drop everything and go. I mean, you're making a choice, and it's the right one, really. You know, but if we get a beekeeping community going, you just call your friend and say, would you feed them? I gotta go. And they'll say, sure. You know, because geeks like me that like bees, you know, we'll go over and help colonies not die.
Hey, Tim.
Yeah.
Quick question about the insecticides, pesticides. So you know how you can go to the big box stores and buy flowers, and everyone provides their flowers to put out. Is there a risk with getting some of those flowers that may have had a pesticide applied to them?
So,
neonicotinoids.
Yeah. I don't know is the honest answer. I doubt it is my practical answer. Most of the research that I have seen, and I am by no means a researcher, but I do look at it. There's the most toxic time is shortly after the spray. And so they're not spraying neonics on those flowers at Eagle or Lowe's or, you know, yes.
So, quick question, like Roundup and beetle spruce kill, when people spray their trees, I'm going to assume that's got to trickle down.
If it kills bugs, it kills bugs.
Yeah.
That's, I think, the safe assumption. And we're trying to raise bugs. So there are things you can do if your neighbors are going to do it. You can try to cover the hive with like a sheet or something, a wet sheet to try to keep them in.
Sprinkler.
Yeah, don't count on a sprinkler. I've had bees fly right through the sprinkler, and I used to go round and round with a guy who kept claiming sprinklers would keep a colony from swarming. Now, if sprinklers worked, you'd Google this and you'd find all these people online that said, I saved my colony with a sprinkler. And you just don't. You don't see that. You get this 1 in 100,000 posts that says, I tried this and I think it worked. You know, but yeah. No. Look, I don't mind being wrong. I've been wrong so many times. You know, one of the best ways to learn is to be wrong. Okay? And I am sure, well, I might be the only one in here who thought they knew something and found out later they didn't, you know. But you should embrace being wrong. And one of the things I'm trying to do with this overwintering stuff, one of the big resistances people have learned they've learned a certain way of thinking about how bees overwinter, and they're not willing to reconsider. And they're wrong. They were working on the best information available at the time, but guess what? It's not the best information available anymore. All right. Pictures of Varroa are just weirdly fascinating to me. They're like this. That's because we imagine something like that coming after us. So they vector over 20 different viruses, and the ones that are the most visible are the deformed wing virus. Can everybody see those shriveled wings? Yeah. So that is a disease that has always been in honeybee colonies. It's always been there. But it hasn't always been injected into their abdomens directly without going through their guts. So their ability to fight it is compromised. So, but it is one of the most visible ones. You also have paralytic bee virus, which you'll see when my bees were really sick 3+ years ago, that summer of 2021, I think it was. One thing about keeping bees on a roof, you see all of them. There's no dirt, there's no grass. I had bees crawling all over the roof. Crawling, that is not natural. There may be a bee or two crawling, although if you're looking in your yard and you see a couple of bees crawling, you can assume a lot more of them are crawling. They're not intended to crawl around. Something's wrong when you see crawling bees. The main reason it hurts our colonies is that it shortens their lives. That's the main takeaway that I want you to remember. These viruses shorten their lives. They only live 6 to 8 weeks in the summer anyway. And as you remember from before, their job responsibilities in the colony are decided by age. That whole thing requires that progression to happen in a timely basis. If you break that up, you compromise the colony. So if your bees are not living as long, your colony can't get all the things it needs done. For example, foraging, raising brood, or the big one for us, getting through winter. Yeah, a short-lived winter bee is not going to make it through winter. Here's what you were talking about. This, on the right side, you'll see the percent of bees that are in the location that the color corresponds to. And you can't see that the red is on the bottom, but essentially 1% of them are on top of the bee where you can see them. And people tell me all the time, well, I don't think my colony has Varroa mites. Yeah, it's got Varroa mites. And that's why this is really important to beekeepers. Because you're going to talk to people who have had bees for years, and they're going to say, I've never had a problem with mites. They've never been aware of their problem with mites. And you know who doesn't have a problem with mites? People who kill their bees every fall. Don't have a mite awareness because the mite buildup happens later in the year, right after harvest time when they're exterminating their bees. So most 99% of bees are on the bottom or the sides of the bottom where they're hard to, or mites are on the bottom or the sides of the bottom. So you remember the population chart that showed that the bee population peaks like in about the second week of July or the first week of July, and then it starts to go down. Varroa are also reproducing exponentially. Their peak happens after the bee population peak, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the important thing to know is that peak Varroa is right when your colony starts raising winter bees. Right when you need the healthiest bees, your colony is the most compromised. You usually don't start seeing it until late summer. With an overwintered colony, it can happen sooner because they come through the winter with a certain mite load. But with a new package, usually not going to see it until, at the earliest, late summer. You'll see a spotty brood pattern. So if you imagine this is covered with comb and those caps are just uniform all the way across, you start seeing holes. You'll always see some holes. But when you start seeing more holes than usual, then that's an indication that the colony is sick. The other thing that happens when you do fall feeding is they don't eat when they should. And usually when that's the case, when they're not eating as much as they should, their population is crashing and you're not noticing it. And why don't they need more food? Because there's fewer bees. Lift them up and look at the population and you go, whoa, what happened to this colony? A month ago, there wasn't enough room for any of them. And And so what happened? And then as their population is crashing right when they need to be storing and capping winter food, we'll get into this more in the wintering class, but they really need to cap that syrup you feed them in the fall. If they don't, it just contributes to moisture in the winter. And if their population is dropping, remember what I said, it takes heat for everything, and making wax is one. If they can't keep it warm enough, they can't cap it. So it's all these things are rolling in, and then if they couldn't raise winter bees because they were too sick, they're going to die before Christmas. If they raise some winter bees but not enough, or the winter bees were sick, then they're going to die in February. And that's ish, you know. I told you beekeepers love to argue. I mean, they might die in early March, they might die in late January. They're going to die before spring. They're not going to make it through. So here, yes.
So if we're not opening up the hive, like how do we know if our bees were successful? And if they weren't until, like, if we don't know until like April, is that when we know? How do you, if you need to get new bees, because yours didn't overwinter successfully, when do you have to order those?
Yeah, so you have to order bees. Usually in early April is still soon enough, sometimes late March. And you'll have a pretty good idea. Remember how we said you can tell the colony's alive all winter? Dead bees. If you don't see new dead bees and the temperature warms up, and it will warm up, you know, and it'll be a blistering 30 degrees outside, and that's warm enough that if you think about the temperature difference between the inside of the hive and the outside of the hive, if you've got a good colony, then it'll warm it up enough for them to take out the dead, to do some housekeeping. And you'll maybe look. If you don't see dead bees for a couple of weeks, and you don't have a wooden inner cover, if you've used Reflectix like I recommend, you can always peel that back and take a peek real quick, not let really any heat out. Well, if you have a sugar board on, like, yeah, the Huffman candy board insert. If you've got that, then you'll see through the opening if you have bees. Yeah, so that's something for the wintering class, but I use a winter feeding technique that lets me see the bees, check on them a little bit during the winter. It's very handy for that exact situation.
I figured out when to look.
Now. Yeah, look now. I mean, what you should see, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but what you should see now is a little semicircle where they've started it, and you'll see bees crawling around in that little gap. And if they haven't started it, that means one of two things. They're weak, or they stored a ton of food. You can't really tell which. But we'll talk more about that later. The reason why you want to check now is some colonies will go through it pretty fast. And so it gives you a feel. You can look at how much sugar they've eaten and how much is left. Odds are you're not going to have to add any more. I only have to add sugar 15 or 20% of the time after the initial sugar that I add. But those colonies that eat it, they eat a lot of it. I don't know why, you know, genetic differences. So this is where we talked about, see, you got the bee population peaking around, they always have it around the 21st, around summer solstice. I think ours is a little later, but I have never counted individual bees, so you should understand that's me guessing. Their bees got a head start that ours didn't, so that's why I think it's more condensed, and so the population peak happens a little later. But the mite peak is later than that, and I think our mite peak is earlier than that because our bees don't have any capped brood by the first week of October, so it's not really possible without new brood for the mite population to be increasing. But the curves are the same. You got the bee population peak, you got the mite population peak. And in this particular case, this colony went from some small infestation rate, I can't really see what it was, up, and at the population peak, because there were so many bees, the infestation rate was only 6%. So the mites were going crazy, but the bees had this exponential growth. And so they were out reproducing the mites. But what happens when the bees start slowing down and the mites are still exponentially increasing the amount of brood they've got, right? That's why the peak happens later. And because there's fewer bees. Now, I'll get into that in a minute. So essentially, what I really want you to see is that the mite population is exploding before you know it's exploding. That's the main thing. It's happening in every hive. Regardless of the mite population, this kind of growth is still happening. So it might have started lower, it might peak at a lower rate, but that's what's happening. And, you know, I don't have many dead bee pictures, so I was proud I found one. Yeah, this is like the biggest duh factor that I'll talk about. Short-lived bees don't make it through the winter, right? So what do you do about mites? You have some options. There's good options and there's bad options. I want to introduce this topic by saying that I don't like doing anything for them. I don't like it. It goes against the way I think the natural order should be. If you think about the way adaptation and evolution work, that what happens is there's some new plague, we'll call it, and that kills all the weak. And then the strong reproduce with each other, and you finally end up with some sort of symbiosis where the pest, it remains a pest, but the host can manage it. That's the way it should work. And when we treat bees, we are interrupting that process. We just are. I mean, we have a reason to do it, and I do it, mind you, but we are interfering with this process. In an ideal world, and this has actually happened in some areas, in some countries that were too poor to afford the treatments, 90+% of their colonies died. They grew them back, some other percent died. They grew them back. Those colonies, the ones that have the kind of traits that let them live with bees, have survived. Okay, they're finding a way to live with it. And there are some queen breeders in America that are focusing very carefully on these type of traits that help bees deal with Varroa mites, and they're trying to do selective breeding to really take advantage of that. Here's the problem. Only about 1% to 2% of all colonies have mite-resistant traits right now. So you, the backyard beekeeper, what are the odds you're going to get that 1 or 2% queen that's going to pass on genetics? Yeah, I would say the odds are 1 to 2%. I remember how probability works from statistics that I almost failed in college. It stays the same, 1 to 2%. That's a bad bet. That means you got to buy minimum 50 colonies before you finally get one. So that is bad. If you really want to do it, it takes thousands of colonies, constant monitoring, and good controls over who your virgin queens mate with. We don't have any of those. None of us do. We can't. Randy Oliver is a beekeeper. Scientific Beekeeping is his website. A lot of really good information. And I'm going to, actually, I don't think I talk about him later. Randy Oliver at Scientific Beekeeping is really good. And he has 1,000+ colonies, and he set out to breed Varroa-resistant stock. And he worked really hard. And he got some colonies that just laughed at Varroa. Just kept them down, not a problem. But, and there is a but here, it took him 5 years before he had queens that could pass those genetics on to the next generation. So even if you did get one of those queens, your queen's good for a couple years, maybe 3 on the outside. Your virgin queen, her daughter, the odds on her having having dominant traits that will be passed on to her daughters are very remote. And she's going to go out and mate with other bees, and the odds on them having Varroa-resistant traits are remote. And this is where it's important to look at the genetic cul-de-sac, the genetic dead end we're in Alaska. All our bees come from California. They all come from California almond pollination. And what do they breed their queens for? Good at pollinating and good at building up in the spring so that they can have enough population to sell us, 75 million bees a year. I'm not saying anything bad about them. That's their business model. It just is. I firmly believe that over the next 10 years, there will be pressure mounting on them to begin selecting for Varroa-resistant stock. But they don't now. And our bees are not naturally resistant. And so if you have a great queen and she goes out and open mates, she's open mating with other drones that are not resistant. And so in a place like Alaska with no natural colonies, no feral colonies that survive the winter, no survival of the fittest, it's impossible to develop a genetic stock that's going to be mite resistant. It's just not possible. And I found out my second year when all my colonies died. Even though the 3 that were the parents of at least a couple, plus them, had made it through the previous winter. They all died, and they all died from mites, all of them. Yeah, so I don't like it, but I do it. But I don't do it stupid, all right? We're backed into a corner if we want to have bees. We're backed into a corner. Here's what I think the bad options are. And I understand people have different opinions. You're at my class, you're getting mine. You're welcome to have your own. I won't argue with you. But I think the bad options are synthetic miticides. Those are the ones that are, that's Roundup, although they don't make that a miticide. Apivar, Apistan, they're trying to develop a chemical that kills a bug on a bug, right? Pesticides kill bugs. We talked about that already. So there are consequences to using synthetic miticides. The main one is brood mortality. They all kill brood. Now, if your summer season is 6 months long, you can survive that brood loss. How long is our summer season? It's short. You can't recover from a brood break like that. They killed queens. Not a lot, but it does happen. If you get on any of these national beekeeping sites, you'll just see post after post of, oh no, my queen is dead. What happened? I treated with Apivar 3 weeks ago. You just see it again and again and again. So, and here's the big one for me. That these miticides persist in the comb. They persist in the comb, and they can actually build up to toxic levels. So, you'll see, if you're on YouTube, you'll see a lot of people in the lower 48 that say things like, you have to rotate out your comb. What does that mean? Does that mean putting it in a nuke and selling it to some poor newcomer? Some poor new beekeeper? Sometimes. Does that mean melting it down and selling the wax? Sometimes. So it's okay to pass on the toxicity as long as it's not in your colonies. Doesn't make any sense to me. I would rather avoid it. And our temperatures are often outside the range of these treatments. They'll say don't use over 90 degrees. Well, our temperature, we don't have to worry about that one. But there's lower ones, there's duration. But for me, the main thing is brood mortality and queen mortality and persisting in the comb. So there are some ways you can manage it. Now, you'll see some writing about a thing called integrated pest management, which just means using multiple ways to manage pests. But if you say integrated pest management, you sound like you know more than you do. If you use a screen bottom board, This is the style of screen bottom board that I use. Called a screen bottom board because the bottom is made out of screen. Just that alone has a 10 to 15% effectiveness at mite population. That's not enough, by the way. You saw that exponential growth. 10 to 15% isn't enough. But it's okay. You can do drone comb removal. Now, remember we talked about specific frames for drones where they'll build? Okay. Anybody know why Varroa prefer drone brood to worker brood? 24 days for a drone to hatch, 21 days for a worker to hatch. What's that mean? Well, when a founderous mite, I'll get into this a little bit, I'll do a quick summary now. You have a female mite, she crawls into a cell, it gets capped. She lays an egg. It's always a male egg because it's not fertilized. That mite matures and she mates with it. Now she lays eggs that hatch into female mites. The growth rate, you'll get different things on growth rate. The one I like to use is 2.5 mites come out. 1 mite in, 2.5 out. I meant to do a really cool spreadsheet that showed the exponential growth. I didn't get to it. But that's 21 days. In 24 days, 4.5 mites come out. That's how fast their reproductive cycle is. All right? So they like drone brood. Duh, because they're more successful. It makes their reproduction more successful. So drone comb removal means you let the bees draw this out, you let the queen lay it up with drones, you let the colony cap it. You'd think I'd at some point remember how many cells are on here, but I don't. A lot. Then you take it out and you put it in the fridge for 48 hours. They say 24, but I say 48 not because I think I'm right, but because that way I don't accidentally pull it too soon. And then you take it out to thaw. All the mites will be dead. And once it's thawed, you put it back in the colony. The mites uncap it. They remove all the pupa and drag them out. And since so many mites are in here, that's a very effective mite treatment. It's a very effective mite treatment.
What time of year do you do that?
Well, remember how I said let the bees tell you? Yeah, it depends on when your bees start building drone comb. Right? So what you'll do is you will have drone foundation in your colony and you'll just watch it when you get in there and you'll see it and you'll be amazed. You'll go out 1 week and they won't have touched it. You'll go out the next week and there'll be a 4-day-old larvae in every single cell. All right? And people say, oh, you have to remove it on time. It's hard. It's not hard. It's capped for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. You have a 2-week window. If you miss the 2-week window, it's kind of like the bus is really hard to catch if you never get to the stop on time, even though you knew all along when it was going to be there. All right? When you see drone comb larvae, you know that it's going to be capped, well, if you see a grub, well, yeah, you know it's going to be capped in just over a week. Okay? And so that gives you a 14-day window, 7 to 21 days to go out there and get it, right? All right, so it's not hard. It's not hard. It's hard if you forget about it, but it's not hard if you're managing it. And this is what I think is important. It's not hard if you're thinking, if you prioritize it. And if this is what keeps your colony from dying, right? You go, oh, well, I got to do that. If you don't prioritize it, it won't happen. And I don't mean to, again, I know life happens, we forget, stuff like that happens. But the sense of urgency we associate with a task often helps us write it on the calendar and make a reminder. I have this device I've used, it's recording me right now. I put reminders on that device, and it very helpfully reminds me to do things, and I'm much more likely to do it with my reminders. Yes?
I want to make sure I understand. So once you know there's a mite problem, you wait for them to cap all the brood. You take the brood frame out, put it in the freezer for 48 hours, and then you take it and put it back in.
Yeah, I'm only going to make...
What do you do with it
Okay, but I'm going to fix the first part because you said once you know you have a mite problem. Who has mite problems?
Everybody.
Raise your hand. It's because mites are the problem. So that's the thing I want you to do. So think of it more as however many mites I have, they're going to be disproportionately located in the drone comb. That's the way to think about it. Maybe you have your miracle queen who has the genetics that your colony is really doing a great job of fighting those mites. Even in that colony, the handful of mites that are in your colony, there'll be more than that, but we're just in a fantasy world, they'll still be concentrated here. And so what you'll do is say, aha, I don't care how many of you there are, I'm going to kill you. So yes, you put it back in the colony, they'll clean it up and the queen will lay it up again.
Okay, so they'll clean all that.
They do it. Now, there are people that like to feed it to their chickens, and the chickens will eat all the larvae right out of there, and that's fine. It's fine. Here's the thing to remember. It destroys the comb, and then the bees will have to repair the comb before the queen lays in it again. And you can't really ask colonies to multitask when it comes to energy. It's a bucket that it's got a certain level. So they've got a certain amount of energy for building comb, certain amount for raising brood, certain amount for foraging. And if you ask them to redraw the comb, they can do that, but you're taking effort away from raising brood or away from foraging. Yes?
Another thing about feeding chickens, and because maybe I'm a geek and I have a lot of extra time, is I like to take tweezers after they are frozen and pull out the drones to see the mites.
Oh, yes.
Because I just want to know like what's really going on, and that's additional data.
So what Barbara's saying is really cool and geeky and informative. That's the main thing. So when you pull this drone comb, all right, and you can take it home. You probably have your colony in your yard, but just take it away from the colonies. And then you don't have to freeze it first to pull the drones out. Take a pair of tweezers. You know, remember how drone comb has that rounded bullet type cap? Take a pair of tweezers and just take the cap off and slide the larvae out. Slide the pupa out. All right? You will see the mites. You'll see them.
Will you clarify, please? Okay, so the drone comb does not go in at the beginning. I'm
Now,
looking for
if I were installing a new package, the very first thing the package is going to do is try to build up a population. Drones don't help with that. Okay? I would probably add a drone comb. Remember, they have to draw it before they can lay it at 3 or 4 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. That's when they're going to be starting to fill it up. They're going to be starting to go, yeah, we got this thing rolling. Yeah. And I'll get into when we talk about setting up for a new package, I'll show you how I would do it. But that said, it wouldn't hurt to put it in there from the beginning because it's a myth that you stimulate them to make more drones. They won't use it until they're ready for drones. And they only raise drones when they know that population peak is coming, resources are good, swarming is an option. That's right. And drone comb always goes on the outside. Always on the outside.
When it's freezing, do you need to put something in the place?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Will you please come with me to these trainings to make sure I don't forget to say that? So if anytime you pull a frame out, you better put another frame in. Because otherwise, you know what they do to the frames on both sides of that gap? They fill it. They glue them together. It's called cross-combing. Or they come up to your reflectix or inner cover, whatever you're using, and they'll hang new comb down between. So gaps are evil. Gaps are the devil. Don't ever let there be a gap between your frames. So that's a really, really good point. All right.
Tim, how does the screen bottom board reduce mites?
Yeah, they fall off. They get groomed off, and they kind of fall down through the screen, and some of them don't ever make it back.
So otherwise, in a hive with no screen bottom board, the mites would fall off, crawl up again, and find another bee.
Or find another bee crawling around on the bottom. The bees crawl all over the bottom board, too.
Okay.
What you're looking at is white chloroplast that's underneath the screen bottom board, and you're looking at the mites that have dropped through. So, well, there's other stuff too. There's some detritus in there, but yes.
Have you ever read of planting certain medicinal plants out near the front of the bees so they can fly through it?
Yeah,
Help clean them?
I have.
Okay.
It's a myth.
Oh.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about oxalic acid more in a minute. Formic acid. There are natural I'm not a big formic acid guy, and I want to be honest. I've never used it to treat mites. It does kill them. And the reason I don't use it is because there's also some brood mortality. Don't use anything that kills brood. But my objection with formic acid is not because it's synthesized. It's because our season is too short for me to have a brood mortality event. And so I'm not interested in anything that can harm my brood. I mean, it's not an argument over whether theoretically it fits in my general paradigm. I'm not collecting or passing on poison. It's just that it does have some brood mortality, and I don't want it then. And finally, the last option is oxalic acid. Now, it's 90+% when you add it during periods when there's no capped brood. Because remember, that's when the mites are under the cap reproducing. Oxalic acid treatments don't get under the cap. It's one of the reasons they don't hurt brood. They don't get in there. So any mite under a cap is safe from oxalic acid. Let's talk about oxalic acid. Oxalic acid, it's a plant-based substance that is present. There's a whole family of plants called oxalics, and Teresa, you probably know what they all are. Spinach. Rhubarb's the big one. It's what gives rhubarb its tang, is what I've been told. Yeah, it's nice to have a gardener in the group so I can double check and see if I've been informed or misinformed again. Oxalic acid does not persist in wax or honey, and it does not harm brood. I'm going to be really clear. It does not harm brood when it's vaporized. There's also a thing called oxalic acid drip that can harm brood. It can. And so I get a few people who want to argue with me from time to time because they've Googled and they said, does oxalic acid harm brood? You could find studies that it does. And if you look at the details of those studies, it's because it was dripped on. They mix it with sugar syrup and they drip it onto the colony, directly onto the cluster, okay? So it works. I'm fine with it. I don't have anything against it, except that I can't afford a brood loss. It doesn't persist in the honey or comb, as we talked about. We used to say there's about as much oxalic acid in a vapor treatment as there is in a pound of rhubarb. That's not really true. It's 3 to 4 pounds of rhubarb. But you still get the point. You could eat 3 to 4 pounds of rhubarb and be fine. You'd never want to eat rhubarb again the rest of your life. But you could do it. All right? It's not toxic to us in that way. But when it's in its vapor form, it's dangerous to us. It's an acid, it's in a vapor form, and so you have to have the right gear to do it. Now, I'm not trying to sell you on that. Right now, I'm just trying to make you understand this whole process. But essentially, it's heated till it vaporizes. The vapor drifts through the hive, crystallizes really quickly, and it kills mites. We do not know why it kills mites. We know it. We're pretty sure it goes into them through their feet. And somehow it interferes with their cell metabolism. We don't know why. It doesn't do that to bees. The bottom line, for whatever reason, exposure to oxalic acid kills the mites. It does not kill the bees. Here's the part I want you to understand. You have to wear protective gear when you are around vaporized oxalic acid. There's a few minutes where you should not breathe it. You shouldn't get it in your eyes. Well, I've seen people applying it with only a mouth respirator. I use a full mask respirator to protect my eyes. I watched a video. I'm not big on following instructions, but I watched a video on how to make it fit right, which saved my bacon because it was trickier than I thought. And I keep it on while I'm by that hive. I can tell you this, within 6 or 7 minutes, and probably less, but it's all crystallized. You have no more safety precautions are required. You don't have to wear gloves. You don't have to touch. You don't have to worry about breathing. Once it crystallizes, it's safe. But during the vapor form, it's dangerous. Now let me talk about when to treat mites. We know that we have a 90 plus kill percent. Some people say 95 plus when there's no capped brood. So the shorter answer is that's the time to treat your bees, when there's no capped brood. So there's 2 obvious times when that's the case. The first is when you have a new package and they haven't capped the brood that the queen has. So I recommend people do a treatment of their new packages 8 days after they release the queen. Does that have to be 8 days? Nope, it could be 7, it could be 6. But you don't want to do it right away. My thinking about why I don't want to do it right away is because I want them to own that space before I do anything intrusive to them, right? So once they're drawing comb and laying eggs, and those eggs are hatching and they're raising those larvae, I feel like they're calling it home, all right? And so it's before they have capped brood in the spring and after all the winter brood emerges in October. They're 100% queenless. The only other time is if you requeen them in the summer, which you first-year beekeepers aren't going to have to worry about. But one of the ways that I think is important for sustainable beekeeping is to do splits in the summer to go into winter with more colonies than you need so you can manage winter losses, because everybody has them from time to time. And when that happens, the method I teach, there are many different ways to do splits, but I teach removing the original queen and putting her in a smaller box. They'll think they swarmed. The colony thinks that there was a swarm and they got left behind. They'll raise new queens. So once in that original colony, you know that anything that's in 24 days after that, every egg will have hatched and emerged, right? Because drones are the longest and they're 24 days egg to drone. So you can go in on the 25th day and give them an oxalic acid treatment. There'll be no capped brood. You may have a new queen emerge, come back and be laying eggs, which is great, but none of those new ones will be capped yet. That's the best time to treat for Varroa mites during that period where there's no capped brood. So this is the part that I'm going to talk about, even though it makes me a little uncomfortable. The cost of treating for mites. A good wand will cost you 130 bucks or so, 140 bucks. Yes, you can get them for $27 on Amazon, and they'll fall apart after the first time you use them. I had one do that. So a good wand costs about 130 bucks. Oxalic acid is super cheap. It's really wood bleach, and you can buy it locally at hardware stores. No one will ship it through the mail to you, but you can buy it locally at hardware stores. It's so weird. And wood bleach. Yeah, wood bleach. Now, it's got to be in the powdered form. So, but here's the thing. A really good respirator is going to be well over a couple $100 with the filters. Maybe it's not well over. But I think I bought mine for right about 200 bucks right as COVID was getting going, and I think that inflation has only taken it up since then. So it's a significant investment. So what I recommend is people go in with other people on shared gear. I mean, if you only have 1 or 2 colonies, that kind of expense really isn't justified. You know, and don't get me wrong, you can spend up to $500 on it. You can spend $600 or $700 on a vaporizer. That is really cool ones. You can put in a bigger dose. You attach them to like a lawnmower cordless battery, so you don't have to plug them in. Or you definitely don't want to buy the kind that you have to plug in. Oh, that's the other thing. You have to buy a small battery. You either have to be close enough to a power source to plug it in, or you have to buy a small battery like a lawnmower battery to take with you, and you have the kind that has clips on the end. So you have to consider your power source too. That's the kind I have. I put a lawnmower battery in a 5-gallon bucket. And I carry it up on the roof with me, or to my other sites. So here's, what's that?
This is like the hard part of beekeeping.
Well, yeah. So here's what I'm doing, and you heard me say I'm actually trying to not make money beekeeping, which is mostly true. I sell honey, but I try to not make money. But I am doing oxalic acid treatments, and I am charging people because I don't want to be abused, but I'm not charging a ton. And what I am hoping is not that I will establish a bee treatment business. I'm hoping people would go, look, he did that and he made X amount of money and he didn't hardly charge anything. I could do that and make more money and help subsidize my bees. And then I wouldn't have to treat anybody else's bees but mine. That's my dream, all right? But I did it last fall. The response was amazing. One person in here? I did your bees too, right? You guys got the full service the last couple of years, man. You're lucky. Yeah, you know, that's that. Yeah. I am going to do it, and if you're interested, you can get in touch with me, and I'll work it out with you. But really, I want somebody else to do it. I just want to be clear, and that's what. Once there are people out there, and in the beekeeping clubs, the two Saba and Midnight Sun Bee Club, if you join one of them, you can sometimes post what's, you know, could somebody come over and treat my bees. Now the risky run is that, but you want to be really clear because there are people that will sell you other bee treatments. And you, in my opinion, don't want to poison your hive. You don't want to poison the brood. You don't want to poison the comb. They're not going to tell you you're poisoning it when they sell it to you. All right? So we're specifically talking about oxalic acid vaporization treatment. It's very effective. As you know, I have a really good overwintering success. I'm a little worried this winter because I keep pushing the limit. I want to try to do it as little as possible. I think maybe I undershot last year. I think I maybe waited too long. I didn't. Last year I did not. You know, I said treat when you do a split. I didn't because I'm hoping that I can start getting a little resistance that I can watch and just compare. I also do things because I have a YouTube channel. I help people. I do things as an experiment. Some of them are good ideas. Some of them are bad ideas. Like one of my really bad ideas was I wanted to see how long the batteries and the brood minder temperature sensors would last. And what I found is that when I went into winter with 60%, they lasted that whole second year fine. So I wanted to see what would happen with 35%. They died right away. That's what happened. And so now I don't know the temperature in some of my hives. But I only did it as an experiment. So anyway, so you know, my colonies are still alive. They're still doing okay. I worry all winter long about my colonies. I know I'll have enough to make it through the winter that I'll be fine, but I want them all to make it through. I just do every year. So anyway, yeah, you can approach me. I can talk to you about it. If you join the club and post it out there, sometimes people will come over and show you how to do it, and they'll do it for free. But you have to be an informed consumer, even when it's a gift. The literature out there says 1 gram per deep. Okay, and a deep is 1 1/3 medium boxes. Okay, that's what the literature says. That's the approved dose. The research overwhelmingly shows that's not sufficient. You need a minimum of 3 grams per deep, a minimum, and 4 is what all the commercial beekeepers are using. Hang on, let me just finish this one thing. It's still not toxic to your brood or your bees or you. That's the important thing. It doesn't build up the same way. I believe it has something to do with water soluble, not water soluble, but I'm not a chemist. I'm not going to try to understand or explain that.
So how much did you use on my house?
4.
4.
Well, it's like 3.5. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it's the little cup.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. There's a wand that you put it in, and the wand you attach to a battery. The wand will only hold so much. Okay, you're kind of limited on dosage. And so if you have a big configuration, then you have to do it twice, or you can mound it. It'll take 6 and work pretty well with 6, the one I've got. They are different sizes. And 6 is sufficient. So that, and yes.
But even at 6, you're not harming.
No, at 4, some people experimented with 5. They're still not getting brood or queen mortality with 5. They're just not getting a better efficacy. They're killing just as many with 4 as they are with 5. And so they don't use 5. If you imagine that you're a commercial beekeeper, your bottom line is, it's a low profit margin to begin with, and so they don't want to do, and the time is always a factor, right? How much time? So they're trying to get the best effects for the least amount of time and the least amount of money. And so in this regard, they're a really good research lab for us. This will probably get me in trouble too. There's a prominent beekeeper who likes to say you don't have to worry about Varroa the first year. But here's the deal. That's true only if you don't care if your bees die halfway through the second year. If you don't care if your bees die halfway through the second year, you don't have to worry about Varroa the first year. You know? And if this particular person ever did an oxalic acid treatment in October and looked at the mite drop, when my colonies were really sick, I had mite drops over 1,000. It was just littered with them, that chloroplast board. So, and so, you know, my mite drops this fall, with me trying to just do it once a year, trying to minimize it, I was getting, you know, 400 to 600 mites. So if I got a 90% kill, that means there was like 40 to 60 left. You know, I'm not worried about 40 to 60 mites going into fall, you know, if the colony population is strong, you know. But I also think that the current thinking is really more, not so much, well, keep them from ever growing, keep the population from ever getting high instead of letting it get high and knocking it back. And really the only difference from my approach will be, that means when I do a split, to treat the split, you know, treat the split. Splits are super important, but as a new beekeeper, a first-year beekeeper, you don't have to worry about it. I'm going to do videos on splits. I've done videos on splits. There's thousands of videos on splits, and they all work. I would just say that if you are, that the type of split, I always prefer removing the original queen. You know, you get in, you find them starting to make queen cells, and they're not capped. Find the original queen, move her, and then your split is done. The bees are going to do the thing they were going to do. You can always recombine them if this colony doesn't make a new queen. Contrary to what people are going to tell you, it will not impact your honey harvest. I'm going to come back to you. This is a really important part. Your bees are going to want to start swarming sometime in the middle of June. Sometimes it's the first week of June with the strong overwintered colonies. Okay? If you're a new beekeeper, they might not want to swarm at all. But if you're managing it, I think you can make it through the whole season without them wanting to swarm. So I'm really just talking about a timing thing here. So let's say, so an egg that's laid in June, let's say on June 10th. How many days till that worker hatches? Okay, so if it's the 10th, what calendar date is that? Yeah, which would be July 1st, okay? But how many weeks is it before that bee starts foraging?
7, 6.
Well, it's at least 21 days before they start foraging. So it's more like 28 days before they start foraging, all right? And so that means it's where do we go? We are now at the end of July. What's happening to the flowers at the end of July? All right, temperatures are getting colder, flowers are starting out. There are years that are outliers, but my point is removing the queen will not impact your forager force at all until that age class, until there's a missing age class of foragers, and that's not till the end of July. All right? And here's the other thing. You know what they do when they're not raising brood? They forage more. More foraging. So one of the things I hit on again and again is focus on beekeeping, not honey production. But I also say you'll make just as much honey, maybe more, focusing on beekeeping than honey production. And this is one of those examples. Because if you're focused solely on honey production and you see a queen cell, tear it out, tear it out, tear it out. If they swarm, you won't get honey. For us in our condensed season, that's really not true. Maybe a tiny bit at the end of the season, but it's not true. It's not true. All right. Yes.
When you move the queen to a smaller brood to do the split, does that, where you place her, does that whole colony need to be far away from the original?
Nope. Nope. So I'll just quickly address this, but then you just watch YouTube videos on it. Some of mine, some of other people's. But I have 6 frame boxes that I do splits into. I take the queen and 2 frames of brood, because remember we said 1 frame of brood hatches into how many frames of bees? You remember? 3 to 1 is the answer. So 2 frames of brood hatches into 6 frames. How many frames are in my nuke box? 6 frames. There you go, right? But that gives them a good start. They start right away. And I give them a frame with pollen and honey on it, so they have food. All right? They think they've swarmed. The queen only goes outside the colony when she's first going to mate and when she swarms. So she doesn't know her way back. You don't have to worry about her finding her way back over there. Yeah, so you can put it, I put mine right beside them. Now what I usually do, because sometimes stronger colonies can prey on weaker colonies, sometimes I'll face the entrance the other way.